Okay, so Ray, I've got it set up and it's recording now, so hopefully our students will be able to see this as well. For the DPA 730 students of Performance Management and Evaluation, my name is Riste Simnjanovski, and I've also got in here Dr. Ray Garubo. So I'm going to give Ray a chance to introduce himself quickly. I'll quickly introduce myself, and then we'll talk to you about what this thing's going to look like. So Ray, you want to chat with them about who you are?
Yes, thanks very much for your kind invitation. I'm glad to be a part of this. I was a public school teacher, public school principal, professor at the University of Laverne. Been presented elsewhere in the world besides just the United States. I really love the doctoral program in public administration, and my background is really on a theory side from Claremont Graduate University. It was hard to get in, it was hard to get out. But I really am in love with the doctoral programs and work hard to make sure doctoral students understanding what they're doing after spending all this money and all this time. So I'm glad to be on this class with all of you, and especially at this week 7. And my background is more theoretical than practical, although I have had some practical jobs in the world, and I've been a consultant and that sort of thing. But Riste, thank you for your kind invitation, and I'm ready for your questions.
Yeah, for sure. So folks, they have my background in that bio, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing. My big thing and my big bias, and I tell folks from the beginning that I'm one of those, I tried desperately to fight that conspiracy theory stuff in my head. I desperately try to rage against it, and it showed up like a wild animal in my dissertation. So folks, if they ever want to, kind of get a peek, the way that I merged PA and the world that I play in, which was K-12 at the time, and then also public schools, was I followed the money about publishers and how they were getting their hands entrenched in K-12 schools, and so I went down that rabbit hole and had a lot of fun with it, and then realized that it's really difficult to get your stuff published when you rip on the publishers. So it took me a little while to remind myself, like, hey, just a heads up, try not to bite the hands that feed you. So, but for this course and for this specific topic, we're going to have a little bit of fun because we're going to be talking about this book, Drive, by Dan Pink. And so Dan Pink isn't a PA theorist. He's not your prototypical, there it is. So he's not your prototypical theoretical person on our side. So what we're going to do is kind of go back and forth. So Ray, I want to ask you first, when I went through the book the first time, I immediately was thinking about McGregor. I was immediately thinking about theory X and Y and getting into intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And so, is that kind of where you were going to, or am I totally off base on that?
No, you're right on target. And I like these self-help books. I think they're instructive and they're theory-based, Riste. So I appreciated you including this in the students' readings. A couple of things I wanted to comment on. This whole notion of motivation and drive, it seems to be these days globally, especially in the United States of America, more self-centered than group-centered, unfortunately. But that's my take, and that's in my world. It's all about me, and I'm important, and I'm special, and I get a trophy, and that kind of stuff. And it's not enough, I think, about we. Yeah. So what Pink does is try to make us think a little differently, and I know you and I share the same scholastic values if we're trying to get our students to think a little bit. So Pink does a pretty good job in giving us some nomenclature, especially the new operating system he talks about, the carrots and sticks he talks about. The carrots and sticks, I will tell you, comes from the Italians, to probably tell you, Niccolo Machiavelli. I actually visited Machiavelli's tomb in Florence on a vacation with my daughter. She had no idea who I was looking at, but I said, this is a great Italian guy that she never heard of, never will. So it's interesting, Riste, to work with human beings, especially to get them motivated to work. Yeah. Work, as an introduction to our discussion today, has to now have personal meaning. When 100 years ago, your grandfather and my grandfather, they went to work. Work was a pejorative term. Work was a burden. Work was, oh, I'm so sorry you have to work. Yeah. Centuries before that, they had a leisure class. You didn't work. You inherited your money. You just had to keep after it. You know, that sort of thing. You got other people to work for you. Now work has more meaning. people go to work, to their jobs, and it's a social event. It's you see at funerals more colleagues than you will families sometimes.
Right.
So I think that's the sort of the stakes that we're working at here, and I think our students in this class need to understand that when you talk to somebody across the desk or in a conference room or at the coffee urn or whatever, they're investing their time and their life into work. It's an investment. Yeah. As a matter of fact, and I'll let you speak. As a matter of fact, there's been some court cases in California, like of course likely, where a terminated person would sue the employer not on the basis of wrongful termination, but on the basis of taking away their property. It was stealing their property. Work is now a extrinsic, value-laden, specific species of life where if I lose my job, that's my personal property you're taking away. Anyway, that's sort of the background I want to sort of get to, but I'll check with you first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're right on. I mean, the Machiavelli stuff, we could go down that all day, every day. I mean, getting into the prince and the idea of what type of leader do you want to be? Do you want to be someone that's feared? Do you want to be someone that's loved? Hopefully you can be both, right? Yeah. But if you can't, his suggestion would be you want to be feared. That, you know, and I get that. When I always have this story about my aunt, she has, if I've told you this story, Ray, you stop me, but maybe my students haven't heard it. She's got these two massive dogs, and I mean they are walking around dinosaurs. And she is a tiny little lady. She's maybe all of 90 pounds, soaking wet. And she's got these huge dogs, and then she has a former Marine husband who's former military, former police officer, and biggest, toughest guy you'd see. And those dogs do not respect him. They walk all over him, and she walks, you know, and they'll lift their leg right in front of him, looking at the couch, and he'll be like, "Don't you do it?" And sure enough, they will, you know. And then she'll walk in, and she'll just give them a look, and they'll both flip on their backs, horrified, right? Now, those dogs exemplify that fear that she has. Now, whether it's psychological, I'm assuming, because she's a pretty diminutive person. But she also knows, those dogs know that they love her and she loves them, and so they'll have that conversation, or not the conversation, they'll have this great interaction. I see Machiavelli's principles right into that, in that relationship. Here's this person who's leading these two dogs, right? They see her as the all-authority component, but they also have her as this loving person. And so Machiavelli, you and I could have that conversation all day, every day. So I'm going to leave that one. The one part that I think sort of struck something was I made a note here. You're talking about work. It's in the 1900s. If we're talking about Taylor, we're talking about this algorithmic work, as I think how our boy here in Drive is talking about. He's saying there's these sort of linear things that folks would do. It's machine type labor. It's repetitive. It's mechanical. It's assembly line type stuff. And so those types of jobs, you wouldn't go home and be like, yeah, you know, I felt so good today about putting on the exact same bolt on the exact same machine
over and over
4,000 times, and they used a timer to time me to make sure that I wasn't too slow, and if I was too slow, there was a person ready to replace me. It's changed now. I mean, look at what we do. I mean, look at what we're doing right now as our jobs. I mean, the fact that we're thinking about something and talking about it, and that is actually a profession. I think the idea of what we've done is become into a society that's less routine, and so that creates this kind of different, I would say more exciting environment for folks, but it also makes it really difficult to figure out what the motivating factors can be for people as they're going through. So, I mean, I just kind of want to throw that out there as well. You and I had talked in the past about this concept of linking theory to practice or theory building. So can you talk to me a bit about where you see this book even being practical? I mean, I get it. This book is a self-help book. It's on the New York Times bestseller. Yeah. And then to go to a doctoral class, and have some Looney Tune professor say, hey, by the way, here's all this theory stuff, but here's this book that's out of left field. Are you seeing it as a connection there? Or are you thinking, hey, this guy's a little off his rocker as well?
No, I think he makes a good case. But first of all, if you recommend it, it's got to be serious reading. So I have a bias already. I know you and I know your work. So students wouldn't have to, or me, buy this book unless It was had some value to it. So let's start with that bias. Um, Second thing I want to say is that what students should realize is that in our society, the 21st century, which is a fabulous century so far, we're problem solvers. First of all, we recognize there's a problem. One of my heroes is Chris Argyris, who just passed away. I just found it several years ago. Chris Argyris put theory into practice when he went out and did his consulting based upon his research findings. So we are a problem-solving nation and a problem-solving society. People from all over the world want to come to our universities because we're problem solvers. There's nothing shameful about having a problem. A problem to me is the difference between the ideal and the real, that gap analysis. So what he does here is tell us, I think in a subtle sort of way, since we are problem solvers, here's another way of looking at your problems. Here's another way of getting better environments. He skips over culture a little bit, and I want to talk to you about that because I think culture is kind of important. Some in schools they call it climate, but I think it's organizational culture, and you know that reading as well. But back to carrots and sticks, and then I'll turn it back over to you. To answer the question, I think drive. I think Pink does a good job in drive. He called it the surprising truth about what motivates us. I wasn't so surprised. I don't think you were either because we're trained that way. But going to the carrots and sticks, if you remember from your doctoral studies, we made you read a book by Deutsch and others on conflict resolution and conflict management. And someone said, and maybe you'll remember the theorist, power implied is more powerful than power expressed. I'll repeat that for the students. Power implied is more powerful than power expressed. The threat of punishment, the threat of withholding rewards, the threat of a terrible work environment can be a motivator. I use this in child psychology when your parents will say, if you don't do this, Riste, there'll be some punishment. And you think to yourself, oh, Mom's serious. Okay. Until about, the age of reason and a little older, you say, well, how bad could that be? I mean, let's talk about that. So you're not so fearful. So I think the notion that with your authority you can cause people some harm, but you don't want to do that. Back to, of course, Machiavelli again. But I think theorists, I think Pink and others use theory a lot better than we did before, because higher education was about theory building and theory testing. This is theory application, which I think is much more valuable.
Yeah. Well, I think you and I have talked about Pink's work in the past, too. I joke that this one is a baseball analogy. This is his book. This would be a triple or a home run. Some of the other ones, they're singles and doubles. I get that. But I think for this one, and I think with the standalone components of where he applies things, for me, it sort of resonated with me. I want to get into this idea of conscious versus unconscious processes. Where, I mean, if we can knock that out in 2 seconds, I will be a happy camper. But, I mean, talk to me about what's going on in Ray's brain, because for me, this one, I mean, even with what I do for a living, I still sit there and I struggle with it,
I do, too. I haven't had an original thought, Riste, since 1986. Because I read so much, I don't know where this stuff comes from. This is the book I'm referring to. See if you can see that on the screen here, and I'll hold it up. And maybe
Social Motivation?
Yes. It's excellent. And I still haven't, you can see where I am in book line 0, but the author talks about, well, it's an edited book by different contributors, but early on in this book, Social Motivation, the authors talk about and this is page 6, another important distinction that has been made in motivation research is that between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, when a person adopts an intrinsic motivation orientation, she finds rewards inherent in simply engaging in the task, the activity in and of itself. When external motivation is present, on the other hand, rewards are mediated by the task. And the authors go on to say, Riste, in this book, is that motivation, now Pink says Pink infers it's a conscious sort of mental or intellectual process.
Yeah.
The authors here think otherwise. They think a lot of it is unconscious, and the only analogy I can use is a Freudian slip, where you say something and think, "Why did I say that? Where did that come from?"
Yeah.
And your wife and your mother are just, "Please, what are you thinking?" Well, it wasn't. I was just expressing. So I want the students to understand that sometimes working with human beings, there is some unconscious stuff going on that even the person doesn't know. And that's why talking and communicating and problem solving, I think, is paramount to any type of productivity, whether the rewards are intrinsic or extrinsic, if that makes any sense.
Well, and that's the part, I think that's where the rub is, right? So we've gotten into this, you know, and I don't want to get into the big picture, so, you know, what's happened to society and social media and all of that, but we've become so distant from that real relationship, that face-to-face or that conversation, or being able to read cues. I can't tell you how many times we've been in conference rooms and meetings, and everyone's in there and they're all looking down at their phone, and then the meeting starts and we put our phones down, but they're still on the table, like we're kind of spot checking. It's like the old Wild West where we kind of leave our gun on the counter and it's like, just in case we need it, it's there. I want everybody to know. I got something else that's more important, possibly. So, but then we take that, right? And, yeah, we've got to have this. Then we force folks into environments where, hey, you know, they get into these work environments and they're unhappy. And, you know, but because they're constantly kind of checking and seeing how glorious everyone else's life is. And so that part's interesting to me. You know, we talk about intrinsic and extrinsic, and we make these assumptions that I think everybody understands what the differences are, that there's this internal motivation, there's this external motivation, there's internal things that may drive you, or you know, external things. I had fun with my students, and a couple of them picked up on it. I used badges in the 725 class, and I threw a couple in the 730 class where I think Dan Pink uses them as, he says they're if-then and now-that rewards. So if you do this, now you get that, right? And I had a couple in there where, you know, I would have something where the students would see, okay, if I got this or I got this percentage, this badge would illuminate, and then I would earn this thing. And then there were other ones that were hidden, meaning that the students had no idea they were there. And the moment that they earned something, maybe they got a perfect score on a quiz, this thing illuminated, and I had a little fun. I thought it was fun, you know. It would say something along the lines of, like, I'm proud of your brain, or something like that, or I'm jealous of your brain skills, and then keep going. Or if they were in a certain percentage of the class, that upper echelon. And the moment for some of the students, I think they realized, like, oh, if I keep pushing, if I can get an A in this class, but if I get a super high A, or if I keep pushing myself, I might get something else in return. There's something else there. And for me, that was an interesting connection, and I was hoping they were going to kind of see, okay, here's some examples of now-that's and if-then rewards that were kind of thrown in there. So that would kind of fit into the components I thought of Dan Pink, but I may have been way off there. The next one is, oh boy, rational choice. Okay. How do we want to broach this?
Let me start.
Yeah, okay.
I will paraphrase a joke by a comedian long ago. He was more of a blue comedian, so I'll clean this up some. He said one out of every 4 people, 1 out of every 4 persons is a jerk. Again, I'm paraphrasing. 1 out of every 4 is a jerk. So pick out 3 of your friends. If they're all right, it's you. The point is, and it goes back to Dr. Cloud's presentation you have in this week, that video. I hope the students have seen that by the time they see us here. When Cloud says that 50% of all of our happiness and all of our happiness is what he calls constitutional, meaning temperament. And I'm thinking, I'm sitting across from a person that if they're unhappy, I got to deal with that. And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. I have supervised teachers. I supervise professors, which is harder. I've been a consultant trying to sell my knowledge, like Argyris and the others that I've come after. But if a person's a jerk, Christy, they're just a jerk. They're just born that way. And I go to the temperament literature. You remember Kiersey and Bates and Myers-Briggs and that sort of thing. And I still remember my Myers-Briggs score. I'm an ENTJ. I took that test 12 years apart, come out the same way. I am an ENTJ, which I've sort of forgotten what the acronyms stand for. I think we just stuck with who we are. And I have to get past people's personality as they have to mine. We get hired for competence, and we get fired for our behavior. It really is sort of that way. So this goes all over the place, but there's some irrational people, irrational, they're crazy, and they, they're on meds, or they should be, whatever. But how do you deal with that? Well, that's sort of life. Because back to our spiritual base, where we're all God's children, I fall back on that. The good Lord said, you got to work with everybody, and you got to take in strangers. That takes a lot of faith and good works, and what we believe in at CBU. But I want the students to understand that not all we teach them is useful. In fact, I had a student one time tell me, in your doctoral program, by the way, at Laverne, that Dr. Garubo, this is interesting, but I will never use that here. That stuff will get me fired.
Yeah.
I said, you're kidding. No, I work with nuts. I work with crazy people. This is rational. This is too loving. This is not what we're used to. Our climate's not this way. You're in your ivory tower, as well as ain't so ivory around here. But anyway, so I want our students to realize that through these readings, and we're sort of forcing them, and I think it's a gentle, loving way to force them, into realizing that this all doesn't work all the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and for me, so rational choice, when you get into the theoretical component to that, oh man, it's in theory makes total sense. The economists love the idea that everything fits into a nice, clean box, that we are motivated, self-interested actors, and that we're always making decisions that's the best thing for us. And then you start to explore that, and you start to test it, and you realize we're irrational. We have, option A and option B, and then we'll 90% of the time pick option A, and then you have option A and option B, and you throw out a ridiculous third option like, would you like to have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or a ham sandwich or get your car stolen? And when you get those three options, then people will go and pick option B. And it makes no sense. It makes no sense. But in economics, we will do that. And so in rational choice, I've always had this fun environment where, economics in general, the theoretical components of finance and all that, we think everything kind of fits into an order. And markets do that too. I mean, we sort of see what the markets do, and there's all of these explanations, and then every time it doesn't do what they think it was supposed to do, they go, well, we hadn't thought of that. That's never happened before, and so we didn't know how to plan for it. And I had this great explanation from a really good finance professor I had in college. And he said, markets forget, and these folks that speak about markets forget that sometimes, you can say an airplane will do this. If you push on this part of the mechanical components, it will do this. If you pull this, it'll go this way. If you pull that, it'll go that way. And they'll say, yeah. And so then we'll go into the room and we'll say, okay, now what happens when your plane turns into a butterfly? And they'll look at them like, that doesn't make any sense. And they'll say, well, sometimes we're completely irrational. And so we'll have these great conversations about that. So for irrational choice, I guess the example would be a person who was hardcore rational choice saying, look, this is how everything fits in. They would take a look at someone who was a firefighter. And they would say, well, why do they run into burning buildings? Well, the rational choice person would say they run in there because at the end, when they save a baby or whatever it is, it makes them feel good. So they're doing it for themselves. And other folks would say that breaks the mold. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that they would put themselves into harm's way to be a hero. And then other folks may argue, well, that's absolutely true. You would think about these examples you have at work sometimes, and I forget John Nash, I think, was the original, going back to
what a mighty
game theories and all of that kind of game theory, and the concept of, the way that you can ensure that countries will not blow each other up is that if one country has a nuclear weapon, another one has to have it as well to check and balance themselves. And in his mind, that made total sense. But then when you put it into practice and you go and have employees do assessments of one another, they don't just go after one another. They don't constantly kind of one-up. They have feelings. They worry about one another. And they say, oh, I wouldn't take that promotion because it might hurt this person. That doesn't fit into rational choice. That doesn't fit into those game theory models. So for us to be, irrational, I think makes more sense because there's so many variables. But I want to ask you, getting into this idea of behavioral economics, I mean, that's Pat Kircher, if you asked her, she would say, hey, they're just rehashing all of Simon's old ideas, and and bringing them all back. So where do you see this rational choice component fitting into what I just chatted about, or us being irrational, or any of the behavioral economics that are kind of coming back into the cool conversation now in textbooks?
Well, one of my weakest points is economics, macro and micro, but I'm learning, and in my stage of life, I'm a little ahead of you, is that all economics is behavioral. I mean, if I want to invest money or time, that's all we have is time and to invest. The economics of surplus, a profit, getting more than you invested, it's a profit of happiness or a profit of money or some surplus of something, some commodity. I think it all depends on your attitude and your feelings about life in general. That's why teaching with you at CBU, when you go to the campus and you see everything on a motto, living your purpose, I think, not to do a little cheerleading here, but I think as a school, we're commanded by, of course, our Christian principles, but also about secular views of that. What are you about? Well, I'm an optimist. Now, I have been wrong about half the time, but that's not bad. For me, there's a pony in here somewhere. You know that joke. I think God has given us a good world. We have to make it better, and we can. I think teaching like you and I do, I think goes to that. If it's my purpose. But I'm not scared by trends. I'm not scared by the algorithms. I'm not scared by the stock market. I'm not scared by the currency valuations. And I have children, Riste. Well, my daughter, as I think I told you, resides in London, and my son resides in Stockholm, Sweden. So they have a very European and Eurocentric point of view as they live their lives with their families in Europe. And we are a much more positive culture. When the stock market goes down here, the smart people say, now's the time to buy. It's cheaper. So that's what I mean about behavioral economics. Our students that are listening to this video, this audio video, should think that they're not spending money, they're investing in themselves. I hope our ideas, one or two of them perhaps, would germinate and make their lives better and more practical and more happy. But that's what I mean by behavioral economics, is that you will spend your money based upon your behavioral patterns.
Yeah, well, and for rational choice and getting into the economics, I mean, again, motivated, self-interested actors, if you look at a typical, prototypical business school, you have to be a profit maximizer, right? You do what's best for shareholders, for the business, and forget everything else and think about Enron and all of those goofballs and all those challenges. And then, all of a sudden, you get something like Wikipedia or Linux or Firefox and something completely free, completely open source. In the book, I mean, Wikipedia crushed a Microsoft Office product. I mean, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that it would drop big, massive programs like Encarta or big dictionaries. Like, it doesn't make sense. Why would somebody donate their time for free? Why would a shoe company like Tom's give away free shoes? That doesn't make sense. And so I think that's where Pink's connection to, I think, was it Vermont, I think in like 2007 or 2008, they were the first state to have LC3s, those low-profit, limited liability corporations, where they were designed to give away some of their money. And if you're an investor, that's tough, right? I mean, you're sitting there investing in a company and you're going to give some of it away, but that tells you that irrational part that we have this, we're humans. We want to be able to give something back. You look at Scripture, I mean, we should be giving something back, whether it's to your church or if you're doing it through tithing or you're investing back your time. I think that's super important. So that fits into this Kahneman stuff for me, and I think for you as well, of getting into the idea of thinking fast and thinking slow. Now, if students haven't read that book or gotten the audio book of that one, I think in their breaks, that's probably the one that, they're like, yeah, I read for a living here, pal, I get it. But that one is the one I think that's sort of a game changer for a lot of folks if they haven't read any of Kahneman's work.
I think I agree with you. I agree with you. There's a lot to consider with all these readings, by the way. And it has to, the paradox for me, Riste, is that we're talking, our clients, our students are successful. They wouldn't be in this program unless they were moderately successful. I mean, they're paying for it, of course. but they believe in themselves and their families. I always talk about, does your family support your doctoral studies, and because you're taking away something from them, money, time, resources, whatever. So it's an investment. But here's where it's difficult to change thinking habits. In workshops, and you've seen this done, where the facilitator will ask you to cross your arms like this, one arm, remember that? All right, and then she'll say, now carefully recross the other direction. Well, that's more awkward. So I think that awkwardness is a part of learning, and we've got to get our students over the awkwardness of saying, I know you've been successful. I know you're probably going to get a promotion. I know you got your last performance evaluation was pretty good. But here's some new things. You don't know what you don't know. I forgot who said that. You don't know what you don't know, so we're going to tell you some stuff that may be true for you. That's the hardest part, I think, to get people who are already pretty modestly successful to reach even a little further. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think that, Kahneman, and he gives credit to a lot of other folks in his book. He doesn't say, hey, this is all me all day long. I mean, he gets that he's part of the big picture. But, I think you're right. The idea of us not knowing what we don't know or knowing what we don't know, not being able to admit that we don't know something is humbling, and it's tough. I use a phrase a lot. Big hats and no cattle, and the idea of having, Say it again. Yeah, I always talk about folks having big hats and no cattle. Yeah, big hats, think of like a big cowboy hat and then no cattle. Essentially, this giant ego, of walking around and acting like they know everything, and especially in the world of being able to have a lot of answers immediately in your hand. In Kahneman's book, he talks about the System 1 and System 2, or thinking, operating System 1 and operating System 2, the idea of being intuitive and then also being rational. And I think one of them, the rational concept is slow, and it's deliberate, it's systematic, it takes time. And then there's the intuitive stuff where immediately we have a reaction to it. It's fast, it's really typically emotional as well. And I think folks have to sometimes, when they watch TV or media or they consume something, they have to try to figure out, how am I reacting to this? Is this emotional? Do I know enough about this? I love it when things get pushed out, media-wise, and they immediately cut to someone, and then they're super emotional, and it's like they're not thinking rationally. This is their gut reaction on what just happens without getting a bunch of information, and then they'll stop to something else. Or then they'll cut to an expert who's done a bunch of research that may agree or disagree, and then they can kind of go and do their fun late news. But the idea of having this person be able to identify and say, this is where we are irrational, and then having folks be able to read that, I think, takes them a little bit of time. And getting into a doc program is just like that as well. I think we come in going, here's what I'm going to impose on the program. Here's where my knowledge is going to fit in, and then all of a sudden there's this moment where you realize, oh boy, there's a lot that I don't know. And the more that you dig, you start to realize that even in some of these theories, I did the same thing though. Rational choice, going back to that, I recognized that there were parts of it that were flawed, but because I was so stubborn, I still put it in my dissertation, and I still defended it. And my chair was looking at me going, what are you doing? And I said, I can do this. I can defend this thing. And it was just, but I knew in my heart of hearts that it was still flawed. It was Swiss cheese, and I was the one that was going to defend it. So I mean, I think the Kahneman component, I think, is pretty cool to be able to get to that. He talked about, I'm trying to remember, I think salience, sentiment, and signals, I think. But he talked about them being like feelings and form. But the one thing I want to ask you about, Ray, is this idea of bias. So can folks genuinely identify their biases? I mean, is that even a possibility? Can someone say, yeah, this is where my skill set lays, or this is where my view of the world, these are the lenses that I put on every day, or is that something that is an impossible task?
No, it's not impossible, Riste, and I'm glad you're bringing it up, and I struggle with it as well, because we're born with biases, going back to Cloud's temperament observation. And I am biased against pain. I am biased against people who are ignorant. I am biased against people who are evil, and that sort of thing. And the doctoral dissertation, as you and I both know, on both ends, doing one and advising one, all we ask is the students control them.
Yeah.
So you have your biases. So step number one, get them out.
And we force them to list them, right?
Yeah.
here's my list of where I'm focusing my study. Yeah.
What thrills you and what really ticks you off? Just get it out there.
Exactly.
Yeah. That takes a seminar. That takes a group thing, a group interaction. It takes some introspection with somebody whose feedback you'll welcome from someone who loves you and wants the best for you. So it's difficult to get it out there. I'm biased, and as old as I am, I still think, why am I saying this? Well, because I don't really like that. I don't know why I don't like that. So forcing our students to be aware that biases are natural. I don't think they're unnatural or evil. I think we're just sort of born with them, back to the temperament theories. Now, after saying that, well, it's going to hurt people if you don't control them. You know, if a person sits before you and you evaluate that person, you have that person's livelihood in your hands, and you don't like the way they operate or something, you're going to control for that. I'll tell you an example. Just today, I was reviewing that video that we showed our students in this week, week 5, with Professor Cloud. He comes on the screen, unshaven. Yep. I shouldn't be talking, you know. I don't look so nice myself. But he tells you, a whiteboard behind him.
Yep.
I'm going to tell you something that's going to be useful to you, but I'm sorry I'm late or not shaven. I don't, you know, I'm not dressed well. I have a bias against that. I think if you make a video, and I'm probably guilty of it right now in front of you, sir. I think I'm dressed okay, but I have a bias about that. And classes at CBU, I never came without a tie because that's just sort of where I am. So my bias is in appearance. Step number 1. Now, I have a bias. I recognize it. Now I have to overcome it in a matter of about 3 seconds. Okay, clear out of your mind, Garubo. That's not fair. You're poisoning the well, so to speak. I think you could control them. I don't think you can eradicate them.
Right. See, in his video, my initial gut was, I can't put this into my class. I can't build this into the course because of the unprofessional visual. And then I thought about it, and I tried to get back to what's the rationale behind. Now, I'm making a massive assumption here, but it was probably he was doing something else and had this idea and was like, I got to get this on paper. I got to get this on the video as soon as possible. I think you and I do that all the time. I know when I was writing my dissertation, I would go maybe on a bike ride, and this is crazy, but I would take sections. If I was stuck, I would audio record myself reading through the section and then listen to it as I'm riding, and your brain all of a sudden, now you're away from your computer, you're completely thinking about something else, and something pops in. Pull over, send myself a text or a phone call or make a note somewhere, and then I'm back on track. I think with him, it might have been the same thing, but I thought the content was in a way where I was like, you know what, I'm going to share this with students. But that video in evals, that one is the one that gets me lit up almost every time. It's like, hey, I would have loved to. It would have been great, but I just too much chest hair in week number 4 or whatever it was. You know? So I get it. You know?
I understand. I really do.
So let's transition to this struggle for significance. I mean, if we're living in a world where, you know, Riste gets on his phone and says, hey, Riste got a Diet Coke or whatever, and I need 50,000 people to like that or whatever it is. I mean, is that me struggling for significance? Are we talking about theory? Where do you see that kind of fitting into what we're talking about here?
Well, we are significant in that even identical twins are not identical. So God made us very unique human beings, and there's no two of us. They're similar, but never identical. So that we start out being significant, and we know from Scripture and from our training and our Christian principles that that's really true spiritually. Temporally, secularly, it's also true as well, and that's the issue, because I am special. Don't you know that, sir? And why are you giving me a poor evaluation? Why are you changing my shift? Why are you demoting me? You know, don't you know how important I am? Riste, we are the major stars in our own movies. Right. We're just wired that way. Right. And we don't succumb to the group process. We fight the group process. Argyris is good about that. going to early motivation theories, and it's a name that escapes me. It's not McGregor, but not Herzberg, but I think the Ohio State studies after the war, World War II, where the researchers said the best leader provides two things: structure, S-T-R-U, structure, and consideration. Here's your job, and I'll be a person and sort of help you with it. All they wanted was, what am I supposed to do, and how are you going to help me do it? How are we going to work together? The significance issue is that it's born in us. I think, especially Western civilization. I've been to Asia. I've never been to Africa, but we are important people. Well, where do we get that? Well, our moms tell us. Our moms don't hold us and say, "Oh, honey, you're so mediocre. You're going to be so sweet as an average human being." They tell us we're wonderful, and if they don't do it, our grandmothers do it, right? So we get that in our head. We're special. Now, at the workplace, we're not so special, or we're not so as valuable as we think we are. So a little humility, I think, goes a long way. But that's people's personal agenda. Always. That is their personal agenda. In every relationship, they are important. They are at value. And we should recognize that first.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I mean, you know, it's sort of the old school. It's the relationship thing, right? It's not you. It's them, right? And immediately, you know, I didn't get that until I got married, and you know, we've been together, my wife and I, man, 16 years now. And I always joke with that too. When I ever interview anybody, they'll say, you know, we'll introduce ourselves, I'll introduce myself, and I'll do a professional and a personal introduction to kind of make them feel a bit more comfortable before they introduce themselves, so they get to kind of know me. And I used to, Ray, no joke, they would say, oh, I've been married to my wife 35 years, and I would interject and say, in a row? and one person said, well, I got a story about that, and then gave me, so no, I don't say that anymore, you know. So, but I think for me, the idea of being able to say, like, okay, back up and figure out, did I do something wrong here? I'm fallible. I've made mistakes. So did I do something, or did I say something that was incorrect here? It's that old, I'm going to misquote parts of this, but it was the idea of the hospitals, and it was in the, if you know this story, give me a heads up and kind of fill in the parts that I'm missing.
All right.
This hospital where one of these hospitals, and I'm not sure what it was, a while back, they had this massive newborn fatality rate. So the babies would be born, and they had, I mean, across the country it was maybe 13%. And in this one specific hospital, they had almost a 45% fatality rate. It just made no sense. And so then these doctors were trying to figure it out. They would go downstairs, the mothers would pass away, the babies would pass away, and they could not figure out what was going on. And so then the doctors had all left. They'd gone to some massive conference. They only left one or two. And then the nurses were there, and all of the midwives were there, and their morbidity rate dropped down to 10% or 12%. And they could not figure out what happened. Then the doctors came back, and the mortality rate went back up, and they could not figure out what was going on. And so then they went through and they started to log what was different about what the doctors were doing and what the nurses had done. And what they figured out was that the doctors, after they deliver the babies, and then maybe the baby would pass away or the mother would pass away, they would take the body downstairs, they would do their autopsies, and those doctors were doing the same autopsies, not wash their hands, and then go back upstairs and deliver the baby. And what they, you know, the story was that was before folks had figured out the germs and washing their hands and all of that, and then being able to transfer. And so that idea of not being able to identify, I could be the problem, right? It has to be something else. It has to be the way the nurses are doing this, or the way that the floors are designed, or the way that the light is coming into the room, or how the mothers or you know, soon-to-be mothers are set up in the. It's got to be something else. It can't be me. And so I was trying to remind myself of that story when I'm in the thick of it and things are going wrong. I'm trying to remind myself that maybe it's not happening to me. Maybe I'm a part of this, whatever's going on. So, yeah, I mean, the significance part for me is massive, you know.
Let me piggyback on your great illustration. Yeah. And I remember that study because they thought the little babies were dead. They didn't have to wash their hands. Anyway, if you remember Chris Argyris, again, one of my heroes, he wrote a book called organizational defenses. I have it here, but I want to leave my post here.
Mm-hmm.
Argyris talks about defensive behavior and type 1, type 2, and type 3 errors, if you remember that. Students, you should look up Chris Argyris, Argyris, great theorist and practitioner. Human beings, even rational and loving human beings, are, what he found out, afraid of being embarrassed.
Yeah.
He could not get through defensive behavior because the guy in front of you, the gal in front of you, is embarrassed, is traumatized, devastated by some incorrect statement you made or something that happened. They're touchy. Goes back to a temperament thing. I'll tell you about it in just a minute if I remember. But anyway, we have to sort of get over that. Yes, you are significant, and don't be so touchy. We talk about your behavior, not who you are.
Right.
We separate behavior from the core of the person. That's why a Christian school is, we're all God's children. Riste, you and I have doctorates, and we've earned them, and we're, I think, productive human beings. But it doesn't matter if we are or we aren't, because we're saved, and we treat each other as fellow Christians, and we treat each other humanely and wonderfully as best we can with our frailties. But this is fear of being embarrassed. Oh, you said this and you said that. I'm devastated. You think you're going to get over that? I mean, how long does it take? I was at a meeting I shouldn't identify, and this person in the meeting did not get the job and said, "Well, this is not right, and you guys are all against me," and yada yada. One of my colleagues at the time, who was a psychologist, said to this person, "Well, I know you're angry, so how long will it take you to get over it?" And the person said, 3 months. That's reasonable. We'll wait, and we'll work with you. That's fine. But I should be identifying gender and that sort of thing, but in context. But we have to accept people for who they are. We're touchy and sensitive. We're stars of a movie. I'm significant. Remember the movie Network with it's a great movie about ratings and that sort of thing. Howard Beale does the story. I'm mad as hell. Not going to take this anymore. Just Google that into YouTube and you'll find it. So what we're dealing with here in this great course that you put together, our management should be about performance in a loving sort of way, realizing all human beings are frail.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, to get back to Drive, it's really, I think he has something, he calls it the cocktail party summary, which probably is not appropriate for CBU, but that's what he calls it, so I'm just direct quoting, right? He talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? Autonomy being this desire to direct your own life, and this assumption that we have the driver's, you know, we're in the driver's seat, that there's this ability to be a master, that you can get better at something and then be able to do something that matters to other people as well as to yourself.
Yes.
That's tough to get into an environment where someone wants to immediately get into middle management or above. Or I love it when I bring on my grad assistants and they're brand new, and then 2 seconds later they'll say, you know, what if we did it this way? And we'll look at it and we'll go, that's genius. Or we'll look at it and kind of look at them and go, you know, I probably wouldn't go into the president's office and say, hey, I know you've been doing this for a while, but I just showed up, and here's my gut reaction of where you're not great. So there's certain things that you can and can't do, I would say, but to be open, to be able to listen to new ideas, I think is pretty cool. And then the final one is purpose, which I think ties directly to what we do here at CBU. You know, this idea to be a part of something bigger than you are, to be a part of something that's going to be long-lasting. I think in the end, everybody they realize that they're human, they're going to pass, and what will they leave behind? Is it going to be a legacy? Is it going to be a book that they wrote? Is it going to be these values that they've instilled in their family and their children or their grandkids? But what are they leaving behind? Is it something that we did here at CBU? Was it this inspiration to get all of these other students, you know, to go and do something, to go be purposeful in PA? What does that look like?
Exactly.
You know, I think that part was pretty cool, and I don't think that Dan Pink came at it from a Christian perspective, but I think he hit it without realizing that he hit it. You know.
I think so too, and I'll leave with you one thought as we wind this up. Is I'm worried that we're changing our students a little bit. They're being open-minded. We're insisting on that and grading for that. So we're making them a little different. They go back to the workplace with all these ideas that we are so enthusiastic about for them, and we try to live them ourselves. But sometimes they don't fit. I've had many doctoral students tell me that I love the program, but I didn't fit anymore. I didn't like the people I was with anymore. I realize now that I could have been better in a different situation. And that's disruptive, Riste. I worry about that all this knowledge and wisdom we're trying to impart and prove it to them, you know, with data and empiricism and faith, of course, makes them different. I think we should warn them about that. I think we should say, you get a doctorate, you're going to be different. That's all. Not better or worse, just different.
Yeah. Well, and I think the idea, you know, we get to bring on brilliant people on a daily basis. I get to interview. I think you know this. I interview anywhere between 5 and 25 people a week. Brilliant people around the country, around the world.
Wow.
And there's different motivators that drive them and what really pushes them to do what they do. But in the end, I mean, it's really them trying to figure out what's significant for them, what's important to them, and then trying to figure out what's connected to. I mean, there's a lot of fear that I think we sort of forget that people have out there. With our students, you know, when they come on board, if they're a student or some of these brilliant people come into rooms, a lot of times they're very quiet because they're understanding that it's going to take me a while to understand this culture, this group, and they're not going to immediately start to push their ideas. And I hope that
they hold back. They hold back. Huh?
Yeah. A little bit. I mean, I would encourage our students that I want them to be vocal, but I think you can immediately become a puppet as well. So you have to be so careful of making sure that the agenda that you've got is genuine and that it's deeply researched. That you have what you're going to be doing isn't this emotional reaction to what you're saying. It's not, okay, I realize that my supervisor is micromanaging me and I'm angry about it and this is how I'm going to handle it. Where instead they could say, okay, this is what's happening, let me kind of go back and get a little bit more information before, and then try to be a little bit more strategic. And I think that composure takes time. I think it's one of those where you get maybe a nasty email of students, you know, when they're working in their professions, may get a really irate email that shoots out to them, and they have a immediate reaction that they want to send back. And if they just took a second, composed themselves, maybe walked away, gathered information, and then came back, they might be able to react to that a bit more professionally. And so I think that takes that part just takes time. I want to jump into grounded theory and/or botany and see where Ray Garubo's brain connects all of this stuff to. You can take botany, you can take grounded theory, but I want to know where you're coming at this thing from, because I mean, botany. Yeah, I said botany.
Well, before I retired out in California, I worked with a real scientist, a natural scientist in botany. And we were at a boring meeting, and we were with some breakout group, as I recall, and he was bored, and I was bored. We liked each other. That's sort of started. So I said, "Is there any link between photosynthesis and organizational behavior?" It's a frivolous comment. It was just to pass the time. Right. From that frivolity, from that unconscious, whatever going on in my brain cells at the time, we discovered that order, O-R-D-E-R, order is the primary motivator for the entire world. We don't want disorder, we want order. So from the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, botany, and allied professions, we want to have order and structure, and most of all, predictability.
Yeah.
Now, there is no more than one version of photosynthesis. It's either photosynthesis or it's not. In our profession, the social sciences, we got all this variation because we're human beings. So what I like about botany and chemistry and physics is that there's order to it. There's a geometry to it. There's a beginning and a middle and an end, and it's sort of linkages. Social science is more mushy than that. That's all I meant by that.
Yeah. Well, I think our students are figuring that out, right? When we start pushing them on the qualitative and quantitative, in the end, the beginning, a lot of them are like, yeah, I love these qualitative components, blah, 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 and then they see how messy it is, and they're like, yeah, but I'm going to do a quantitative study. They can look at numbers and then knock it out, and they say, yeah, 37% of the folks did this, and then that was it, as opposed to, this is how they felt. This is what happened.
Well, the quant guys will tell you, I don't care. It's either a 0 or a 1. That's it.
Right.
The mushy guys, and no offense to Cresswell, but I'm up to here with Cresswell and lived experiences and stories. You know, well, tell me how you feel about it. Well, that's important to me, but you can't generalize from Ray Garubo to the rest of the world, as marvelous as that would be. So I like to quant people because it's either a 0 or a 1. It's either significant or it's not.
Well, and it's tough too, I think, because when you work in the social sciences, there are a lot of studies out there, and K-12 does it, but higher ed does it too. I did this with my class. I'm going to publish this study, and now it applies to everybody. And it's like, well, no. Tell me about your class first. You know, we were at a faith-based institution. There was this European white professor. I mean, they've got to know that part, right? Who's asking the question? What was my bias when I asked these questions? So that part befuddled me. I got Ray to give you a side story, to tell my students a side story. So to give you background on me, when I taught middle school, I had my students, and I was teaching in Fontana, and I was in a tough little area, but my students were just remarkable. Their families were awesome. We just worked. But the first thing I did in this history class is we came in, they didn't know me, and I gave them an introduction to myself, and I told them kind of a bit about me, and then I grabbed the book, and I had them pull out their phones, and I said, let's go through every one of these authors. Let's get to know who they are. And every one of them, you've got professors, but all of them, when we pulled up their pictures, all kind of looked the same. And then we looked at the book, and I said, this is strange, right? It seems strange that we have all of these things that we can learn, and Europe we cover for 6 chapters. And the Aztecs, Incas, Mayans, everything that we've got in these areas, we cover in 3 paragraphs. That seems strange to me. So we're going to kind of tweak a little bit, but let's let that minimum be able to recognize bias. When we see this, we're going to see the stories from victors. We're going to see the stories from folks that have the ability to share these stories. And so, yeah, I mean, when we talk about botany and order and all that kind of stuff, someone still has to define those things. Someone has to say, this is what it is, and someone gets to tell that story. So I always joke about that as well with the students, and it deviates a little bit, but it gets into mastery, it gets into purpose. What did they see their purpose was? Their purpose was to share this story with other folks, and my purpose was, I want to remind these students that these stories are also important. Being able to take a look at this is where it kind of comes in. And immediately they kind of, they're 11 and 12 years old, kind of figured out, hey, this guy's a little off. And that one, Ray, that one got my hand slapped for sure. Like principal's office with my students, So the last part is, Ray, let's wrap up. We did pretty good. I think we did pretty good. We're under an hour. Living our purpose, living your purpose. It's not cliche to me.
No.
I love working here. It's a good job on a bad day. My students, and you know this too, challenge me on a daily basis. And then I think there's this moment where they realize that feedback he's giving me isn't because he doesn't like me. It's because he read my stuff, he cares. He's shooting emails back. So I want to know from your perspective, where do you kind of see this, either this book or this course, or just in general, kind of parting thoughts on living your purpose here?
Well, we were just talking about biases, and Riste, this is not my first rodeo. I've been in 5 or 6 major institutions. My undergraduate and graduate degrees are from Cal State Fullerton, as a good school down in California. I got in and got out of Claremont Graduate University, but I've taught for National. I've taught for University of Phoenix. I've taught for Laverne, of course, and now CBU. The culture of our higher education is what concerns me a lot. I had some great professors at Claremont. These were men and women from Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, Stanford, University of Chicago, major places like that. But they were human beings. They were humble. One professor told me, when you get out of here, which I thought I'd like to get out of here, when you graduate, all you're going to find out is what you don't know, how much you don't know. So I like the humility of CBU. I like the fact that we can talk about ourselves. I like the fact and we should have probably done this, is open with prayer. I loved it when I was on the campus. Let's start with prayer. Let's invoke the Holy Spirit and God into our hearts, because you got to change the heart first, and then the mind can sort of generate in. So CBU, and I hope I'm here a long time, means a lot to me, and the students mean a lot to me. The cohort liaison job you guys gave me is wonderfully fulfilling to me, because you're helping people, you're playing to their strengths, you show them how it works, and you care about them. So it's a little cheerleading here, but I'm glad you asked. It's a good time for me to tell the students and you how grateful I am for being a part of this team.
Well, and I think it's a blessing. I mean, we see that, you know, I tell folks, even in the interview process, and you know that with how many interviews I conduct, I tell them straight up. I'll say, this morning when I was going through my notes and having my cup of tea, going through the files, and I was praying for you. I was praying that you were going to be comfortable, that this conversation was going to be
God bless you for that.
Hopefully comfortable, but also that when I asked the question, that they had those responses ready, that it wasn't forced, they weren't pretending to be someone else, they were themselves, and that this is going to be hopefully a good relationship. In the end, when we're looking at faculty, I mean, we've already filtered them for content and expertise and all that kind of stuff. I'm looking to see if they're a missional fit, and if they have the right attitude and work ethic to work with us. You know, putting a person in front of students, there are a lot of content experts out there. I always joke that there's a lot of A students, and they work for a lot of B and C students, because they're fighting all of this information that they've got, and then how they can share it. And there's a lot of folks that have the information in there, but they don't have the composure or the grace to be able to share that with other people, and then watch folks as they struggle through it. Maybe they learned it so quickly, they mastered the content or the theory, and it was so easy for them that it's difficult for them to understand what a student struggles through. The methods professors, right? If you're a great statistician, I'm always cautious of someone who's very good at statistics to teach statistics. I want someone who was terrible at stats that now understands the concept, that can go, hey, just a heads up.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way. Yeah.
It took me a while
to figure out. How did you conquer statistics? That's a good insight.
Let me break this down for you a little bit. So I think that's the part. I mean, we can tell our students that we care about them. I think they'll know that. They can watch us pray for them. But I think the components that we do behind the scenes that they will never see, that we get up in the mornings and we pray for our students, that when they shoot us an email, I'm looking at that going, they're struggling right now. Here's an opportunity for me to kind of get back and give them back some grace and some responses, and keep pushing them and get the rigor there as well. And I think to get back to Dan's book, I mean, what do we do it for? You know, am I going to use a carrot? Am I going to use a stick? Or am I going to try to realize that this student came here with the intention of hopefully moving forward and being able to use this information for the rest of their lives, to impact their community, to better their families and themselves, or at minimum to be able to think. So I'm hoping that it's not just a degree on the wall, and that really it's purposeful.
I agree. I agree with that. My only precaution, Riste, is that, and I'm trying to be careful in my own life, is not to set up, because I want to help so much, a dependency relationship, where you'll do it for them, you'll cover for them, you will write it for them, you will, no, wait a minute, I'm going to help you, but you got to help yourself. So you got to do something. And I'll give you the time and the tools and the support and the love and the prayer, but don't make this our project. It's yours.
Right.
But it's yours. Otherwise, sometimes they just latch on to we do-gooders because we love to do that and that sort of thing. And it's not an autonomous, authentic individual accomplishment anymore.
Well, that's selfish on our part, right? I mean, if we do that, we rob them of that opportunity to say, I did this.
Exactly. Well said. Well said.
I think that component is something that we kind of, you try to balance the support with the hard knocks. I don't want to make it impossible, but I think the students do. They need to get there and go, I don't get it. It's like, well, yeah, it's going to take time. Reread it, take time, digest, sleep on it, think about it, and then go start reading other things. I would show in one of the courses, I don't do it anymore, I would show the movie A Bug's Life, and I would show the movie, it's a cartoon called A Bug's Life, and it's about these ants that have these overlord grasshoppers, right? And I used it to talk about feudalism. and social class and social structure. And I said, this is perfect because it's visual, right? They're physically under the ground, and they move up through these kind of social classes. And I talked about that. I talked about the United States and how social classes in the U.S., especially socioeconomic status and other things, are permeable. You can work your way up. You can come in. You know, you can become a citizen. You can become a senator. Like there are ways to kind of work your way up. And so I've always had a little fun with them. But I think that for me has always been making connections to weird things. I think it makes for a unique environment, and especially in PA, I think it gives the students an opportunity to kind of think, okay, I have this component, I can connect it to this, but I could also show someone who's outside of my field. This is where it kind of connects. You know, I get to teach a couple of history classes every now and then when I'm not teaching at the doc level, and we'll talk about the hero cult and the idea of heroes and what that looks like, and I'll snap a quick video from Twilight and, you know, vampires and all this stuff and say, you know, if this is your idea of your future boyfriend, your current status of finding a mate is going to be very difficult. And so having these expectations is going to be pretty difficult. So we have a little fun with them as well. But, you know, I want to tell you, Ray, this is an absolute pleasure, man. I'm blessed to be able to work with you. I hope the students found this somewhat enjoyable and kind of get to see what we get to play with all day, every day. But I thought, and to give them full disclosure, this was totally Ray's idea to be able to have a conversation about this and to be able to share it with students and have us just kind of ping pong back and forth about what we thought about.
It's our idea, but thank you for that.
All right, well, I'm going to click this little stop recorder button, and I think we're done. So we're going to continue praying for our students, and then if you have questions, reach out to Ray or myself directly. God bless you, folks. We'll talk to you later. Good talking to you, Ray.
Bye-bye. Thank you.